Now, by the time we get to 200 BC, Rome was starting to expand into here. Oops. Rome was starting to expand into here. And they're having all these fights with the Gauls, who was France, and the Goths, who were with Germany. Some of you guys might have seen this movie with Russell Crowe, hey, called Gladiator. That was this time. When Rome was just in the process of coming into Europe. Europe was a vast forested place. But get a load of this about other pieces, other things that were described by Europe. This is from Professor Gilbert Murray. Quote, early accounts by Romans during this time described the peoples that they encountered as worshipping Mother Earth. They were organized into clans and tribes. They lived as semi-nomadic hunters, semi-nomadic gatherers. Now, upon conquest, these people were forced to work as slaves, laborers, and expendable frontline soldiers. Now, if you think about that for a second, you think, well, how can that happen? And how is it that Rome was so effective in the first place by being so efficient in their battles? Well, if we forget about this for a second, and if we just think about what's happening now, the American military has a gigantic budget. The American defense budget is just staggering. It's the single largest investment that the American citizens pay into, whether they realize it or whether they don't. And you can create training, technology, hand-picked perspectives, philosophies, war techniques, war machines, and if you have a lot of money, you can become very efficient at that. And that's essentially what it was. As Rome started to expand, it forced citizenry to cough up taxes and pay all kinds of things as Rome forcibly occupied their territories. Other things were going on. Get a load of this. People became increasingly assimilated. By that, children, as long ago as here, were forcibly taken to be re-educated as Roman citizens. A lot of times the adults were killed, but the adults were taken, they were imprisoned, they became slaves, they became expendable frontline soldiers. When you think about the war techniques of those days, you kind of had sort of like a Bugs Bunny movie where you've got one side bristling with lances and another side bristling with lances, and they just threw these packs into each other. The frontline soldiers didn't have a chance. They had no chance to survive much. And they also didn't have a choice whether to fight or not, because if they didn't fight, they would be killed by their superiors anyways. So when we talk about expendable frontline soldiers, that's how Rome treated the citizenry. They smashed up families, and they did some interesting things. Get a load of this. People who were tribal chiefs or high-ranking families were especially targeted for systematic assimilation or death. Now, if you think about that for a second, I'm just going to give you a quick blast into the future. When the colonization of North America came, for sure, and the Aztecs, for sure, the highest, the most powerful families were the ones that were first targeted. The families who had leadership, even if they didn't have money, like medicine people, holy men, holy women, were targeted because they were seen as people who were keeping the individuals who were keeping the people together. They provided the glue for communities and nations. And so they were especially targeted by the merciless Roman legions. After a few decades, citizens, quote, became effectively Romanized. After only a few decades of expansion, citizens became, quote, effectively Romanized. Now, from here, by about 150, Rome is continuing to expand, and by about 150, it looked about like this. So all of this lower end of what's now Spain and France was taken over. There was a small area here that wasn't. Why? I don't know. They made huge inroads this way, and they worked their way down the coastline that way, and they occupied that. Now this was absolutely the Roman Empire in all, with everything that it meant. Rome also had gigantic areas of land that it was starting to gain as allies, and huge big tracts of places where Rome was leaking into and had lots of influence. If the army was strong enough, they would be able to exact taxes. But even if the army wasn't strong enough, what they started to do is that they would go in and they would be able to take resources, even if they had to be armed. If they had to go in with an armed contingent to go into these areas to take resources, they would take them out, and then they would bring them back home, which by this time occupied all of this. Now, again, just to try to hook this up with modern day, the citizens of Rome were persecuted, but they also benefited. Now, if you think about it, in April of 2008, it's striking that we can go to Safeway and we can buy bananas and kiwis and all kinds of stuff that don't go anywhere around Calgary. And we can get all kinds of things because of the world markets and world trades. We can benefit from this as ordinary citizens. And that's exactly why Rome had a lot of groundswell of support from back home, because citizens were benefiting from these type of aggressive wars. Rome keeps on steamrolling. By 50 AD, or BC, sorry, Rome looked like this. They had taken over all the rest of this by then. There was, I guess what's now Portugal was still there. So they took over all of that. They occupied all of the rest of the interior of France, Germany, and up into here. Oh, they had gotten that a long time before. This was taken. This was taken. A big area here was taken. So you can kind of see the progression of this, that areas that maybe were kind of like in the wild country before, that you could go into there if you had a legion with you of soldiers, and then you could get back out. But over time, they became part of the empire. And of course, the Allies and other parts continued